April 24, 1967. The Orenburg steppes are silent, save for the crackle of burning magnesium. Soviet rescue teams don't find a spacecraft. They find a pile of molten debris and a single, identifiable human heel bone. This was the end of Vladimir Komarov. The descent module had hammered into the Earth at terminal velocity, its parachutes a tangled mess of useless nylon. What remained of the cosmonaut was a shapeless mass of charred flesh. Despite the horror, the Soviet government held a state funeral with the coffin open. This was Komarov's final, posthumous demand. He wanted the Politburo leaders to physically contemplate the result of their insistence on a suicidal launch. For decades, the truth of Soyuz 1 and the later Soyuz 11 tragedy remained buried under layers of censorship. We were told an epic of progress, but the reality was a narrative of deep scars and extreme sacrifice. Paradoxically, these deaths forged the bridges of international collaboration that sustained humanity's presence in space today. This is the hidden history of how camaraderie between mortal enemies survived the most critical tensions of the Cold War. The genesis of the Soyuz 1 disaster was pure political pressure. Leonid Brezhnev demanded a space milestone to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the October Revolution. Science was sidelined by the calendar of propaganda. After the death of chief designer Sergei Korolev in 1966, the Soviet space program lost its technical compass. Administrators who prioritized the schedule over safety now held the keys to the kingdom. The Soyuz vehicle assigned to Komarov was immature and dangerous. Prior to this flight, 3 unmanned tests had ended in critical malfunctions. Technicians documented a staggering total of 23 structural and design problems. One test had self-destructed over China. Another suffered a heat breach that would have incinerated any occupant. Everyone knew the ship was a death trap, but the wheels of the Soviet machine could not be stopped. Vladimir Komarov was fully aware his chances of survival were minimal. His decision to fly wasn't born of blind loyalty to the state, but of a deep, protective friendship for the man sitting next to him. Komarov confessed to a KGB friend that he would not abandon the mission. He knew that if he backed out, the leaders would send his backup pilot in his place. That backup was Yuri Gagarin. "If I don't make the flight, they'll send Yuri," Komarov stated. "And he'll die in my place. We have to take care of him." He wasn't a passive victim. He chose a deliberate sacrifice. April 23, 1967, 3:35 a.m. The launch from Baikonur was successful. But once in orbit, the spacecraft's immaturity immediately asserted itself. The left solar panel failed to deploy. Soyuz 1 was starving for power. Power was reduced by 50%. The attitude control system began to fail. Komarov spent 13 orbits fighting a losing battle against a vehicle that wanted to tumble out of control into the void. Reentry was a nightmare. The automatic systems failed entirely. Komarov had to perform a manual orientation while hurtling through the atmosphere. Against all odds, he guided the ship through the wall of fire. Then came the final technical betrayal. The main parachute failed to deploy. Komarov triggered the reserve, but it became hopelessly tangled in the drogue chute. He was now just a passenger in a falling rock. A persistent myth holds that US listening stations recorded Komarov screaming with rage and cursing the engineers as he fell. But official records and historians tell a different, perhaps more heroic story. Komarov remained a professional until the end. His last recorded words were calm. "Thank you. Tell everyone it happened." He was referring to the successful separation of the modules before the final silence. At 7:00 a.m., Soyuz 1 hit the ground at 50 meters per second. The impact was so severe that the retro rockets exploded. The spacecraft and the man inside were consumed by fire in seconds. Vladimir Komarov's sacrifice saved Yuri Gagarin's life, but it couldn't save the program from its own systemic failures. 4 years later, the Soviet Union would face an even more haunting tragedy. June 1971. Soyuz 11 carried 3 men to Salyut 1. Dobrovolsky, Volkov, and Patsayev. For 22 days they lived in the world's first space station, setting a record for human endurance in orbit. The mission was plagued with incidents. On day 11, an electrical fire nearly forced an evacuation. Tensions rose, mental errors were made, and the stress of the long mission began to take a toll. The final tragedy occurred during separation for re-entry. At an altitude of 168 kilometers, the force of explosive bolts caused a tiny vent valve to open prematurely. The air began to bleed into the vacuum. The physics of decompression were relentless. In the vacuum of space, the cabin air escaped in less than 1115 seconds. The cosmonauts had less than 20 seconds of useful consciousness. They tried to locate and close the valve, but it was hidden in a hard-to-reach place under their seats. Patsayev died near the valve, his final effort to save his crew cut short by the void. The capsule landed perfectly on autopilot. When the rescuers opened the hatch, they found the three men sitting up, their faces calm. They looked like they were merely asleep, but they were already cold. Medical reports noted that Dobrovolsky was still warm when the hatch was opened. Their useful consciousness time was their only enemy in those 3 minutes of descent into the void. The Soyuz 11 disaster forced a radical redesign. It was a lesson learned in blood, but amidst these national tragedies, a secret history of human connection was beginning to emerge. Despite the public rhetoric of competition, there was a deep professional respect between the key figures of both programs. NASA even attempted to send representatives to Komarov's funeral in 1967. The Kremlin rejected the proposal in a moment of heightened state paranoia. But the walls of the Cold War were not as solid as they appeared to the public. Friendship was about to break the blockade. In 1971, Tom Stafford was sent to Moscow. His presence as a pallbearer at the funeral of the Soyuz 11 crew was no coincidence. It was the first public crack in the mortal enemy's narrative. The presence of astronauts in the Kremlin was the door we opened for cooperation, Stafford later said. We weren't enemies, we were men facing the same void. The 1975 Apollo-Soyuz mission required unprecedented technical synchronization. The Apollo used pure oxygen. The Soyuz used normal air. NASA engineers had to design a docking module that functioned as an airlock. This wasn't just a PR event. It was a technological marriage. Tom Stafford, who had carried the remains of his rivals 4 years earlier, was now the commander of the mission that would unite them. The friendship between Stafford and Leonov became the symbol of this new era. Leonov, the first man to perform a spacewalk, developed a bond with Stafford that transcended terrestrial politics. Leonov became the godfather of Stafford's adopted children. Stafford even helped Leonov navigate the legal process to adopt 2 Russian children years later. The mortal enemies were now a family. One of the recurring questions is, why didn't the crews wear spacesuits? During the early Vostok program, suits were mandatory, but the Soviets later eliminated them to save space in the extremely cramped cabins. The Soyuz 11 disaster forced a radical change. Starting in 1973, the Sokol spacesuit was introduced, specifically designed to protect cosmonauts during the dangerous phases of launch and landing. NASA followed a similar, tragic path. Space Shuttle astronauts stopped using full pressure suits after the first test flights, believing the vehicle was safe. This complacency ended with the Challenger disaster in 1986. Only after the loss of 7 lives were the orange escape suits reintroduced. The lessons of space exploration are almost always written in the blood of its pioneers. In online forums, some refer to a Michael Kalle as a forgotten hero or key engineer in these disasters, but fact-checking reveals that Michael Kalle is not a figure in astronautics. Records identify Michael Kalle as a captain in the U.S. Coast Guard or an academic specializing in flood studies. There is no verified connection to the Soyuz or Apollo programs. History has its ghosts, but this isn't one. Even the name itself is often misunderstood. The Russian term Soyuz is pronounced phonetically as Soyuz. What it meant was what it was trying to represent: union. From the pure oxygen fire of Apollo 1 to the parachute failure of Soyuz 1, each accident led to a complete redesign. The safety we enjoy today was bought at an incredible price. Today, despite geopolitical tensions on Earth, the descendants of those cosmonauts and astronauts continue to share the same air. The legacy of Stafford and Leonov lives on in the International Space Station. Our parents met on the LB in 1945 to end a war, Alexei Leonov famously said. We, his children, met on the LB in 1975 to begin a peace among the stars. James Oberg, the space historian, noted that the harrowing image of Komarov's remains was a lesson forced upon other cosmonauts, a grim reminder of what happens when politics overrides physics. Space is an unforgiving environment. It does not care about national borders or ideological disputes. It only cares about the integrity of the SEALs and the courage of the crew. The forgotten heroes of Soyuz 1 and 11 did not die in vain. Their sacrifice humanized the space race, transforming it from a cold competition into a shared human mission. As we look to the future, we carry their memory. From the charred remains in a Russian field to the silent sleep of the void, their story remains the foundation of our path to the stars.